Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Vinnie Eastwood Show. It's the lighter side of genocide, because in a world so full of chaos and madness, if you lose your sense of humour, you'll go friggin' nuts. Broadcasting live from the fabulously fluoridated capital of Auckland, New Zealand, the island-chained nation in the sunny slave South Pacific. It's both fluoridated and Fukushima irradiated, and everybody has a part-time job as an incandescent light bulb on behalf of the Prime Minister John Key, former Federal Reserve banker, to help the economy. Today we have one of the big and illustrious, fabulous people that walk around the planet who actually have done an awful lot of work and research of a primary nature which can give us some insight onto how the world truly is. His name is Jan Irvin. His website is gnosticmedia.com. That's Gnostic with a G. And also, you can purchase up to, I think he's written a number of books there. One that I was particularly interested in is The Holy Mush-room, Evidence of Mushrooms in Judeo-Christianity. And he's a very well endowed in the media sense of the word man, so I'd like to welcome him now. Jan, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me on.
Now, for those who are unfamiliar, would you please give us a brief background on this this book you've written, The Holy Mush-room?
Sure, okay. Well, that's actually my second book. My first book was Astrotheology and Shamanism. That in that book, we went in and looked at the as above, so below themes between sun worship and solar worship, etc., star worship with entheogen use or psychedelic use in the ancient religions. And this was published in 2005, and then I put it out in a second edition. And then the follow-up research to that, I had been working with John Allegro's daughter, Judith Ann Brown, and we were investigating at the time what happened to John Allegro's career and his background. And I guess I should tell people who John Allegro is. He was this famous Dead Sea Scrolls scholar that in 1970 came out and published a book called The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, declaring that Judeo-Christianity was based on a fertility drug cult. And then he went from being one of the most respected scholars in the academic field to one of the most mocked and ridiculed. And his career was pretty much destroyed overnight. But in the last 42 years, a number of professors and scholars from all over the world have picked up what Allegro was researching. And in my book, The Holy Mush-room, that you mentioned, what I did was I went through all of the attacks against Allegro's psychedelic and mushroom research in the Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, all of his specific ties to entheogens. And I went through line by line, and I showed that all of the attacks against his work were in fact false. And then I followed up with 40 or 42 Christian icons that explicitly show the mushroom. And then I concluded the book with an ancient primary Christian Orthodox text, the Epistle to the Renegade Bishops, that specifically discusses the quote-unquote holy mushroom. And this was the first ancient primary text that had ever been published of the quote-unquote holy mushroom, and thereby completely vindicating Allegro's work. And, you know, today we've got a number of scholars all over the place. There's Professor John Rush and Alan Piper, and there's Professor Earl Lee and Professor Carl Ruck, and a number of others, even some Italian and German scholars that have come out fully publicly endorsing Allegro's work, and furthermore showing that the conclusions by Wasson and other scholars in previous decades were completely wrong. And in fact, the attacks against Allegro's work were based entirely on fallacies. And this guy Wasson, who headed all of the attacks, in fact admitted, and he was he was the pioneer of the field of ethnomycology, which is the study of mushrooms and religion and culture. And this guy, he is the one who launched all of the attacks against Allegro. And then so we revealed that all of the attacks against Allegro's work were in fact false. And like I said, so anyway, today there is a large and ever-growing and expanding academic and independent research into this area of psychedelic drugs and Judeo-Christianity. And it was always okay to study psychedelic drugs in other religions like Hinduism or South American shamanism or the Norse or whatever. But when you start investigating Judeo-Christianity, they do not like that at all, as it exposes part of the control mechanism that they use psychedelics for. And if obviously, if these people are using these substances in secrecy and not dispensating that to the public, then they have an agenda there. They're occulting information. And the only reason to occult something is, the word occult means hidden. And the reason why you occult something is to use it against others. And so, I think this is the core reason of suppressing the research of ethnomycology and how it ties into Judeo-Christianity, and especially suppressing John Allegro's work, as it just completely blows the cover off of this whole scandal.
If John Allegro was persecuted for talking about this, I would presume you have, and I would also presume that throughout history there have been many people and cultures that have experienced suppression.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's funny that you should say that, and as long as I was publishing what and originally, you see, you have to go wherever the research takes you. You don't put your conclusions first and then look for the evidence to fill that out, right? And so early on, because of this investigation into Wasson's background, I just started allowing the research to take me in the direction that it would and that the citations showed. And so eventually that led to, after my Holy Mushroom book, for 6 years, I published that in October 31st, 2008. So, the last 4 years, I've been investigating Wasson's background. And so that just started turning up all of this stuff that wasn't known before. And so previously I had, I knew there was something fishy about Wasson's background, but I didn't understand the level of trickery and mind control that was behind the psychedelic movement. So, eventually this whole path of investigation led me to researching Gordon Wasson's background and discovering through, all of Wasson's archives are stored at Harvard University's herbaria there, which is part of the Botanical Museum. And they have a control on all of the information, essentially, and they don't allow anybody in who's not telling the official story. And so early on, I realized that every conversation has two sides. So Harvard would only have Wasson's side of the conversation. So why not just go to other universities where some of the people that Wasson interacted with would have their side of the conversation stored? And so sure enough, I started doing this and went through about a dozen universities and turned up about 1,000 pages of information that told a completely different side to this character Wasson that founded the field of ethnomycology and showed him, well, eventually we found documentation primary that he was a chairman of the Council on Foreign Relations. He was also a high-level asset to the CIA, and I have personal letters between he and George Kennan where he's actually attempting to recruit George Kennan to the CIA shortly after the OSS was closed down. So, and Kennan replies that some debacle with the OSS was so bad he was pretty much done with working with the agencies. But if the DCI, which is the Director of Central Intelligence, and the president could not use Kennan's services directly, then they would have absolutely no use for his work indirectly in the CIA. So in other words, what he's telling Wasson is, you know what, just have the director of the CIA contact me or the president contact me directly if they need me to do a job. I don't need to work for the CIA. And so this exposes Wasson as a high-level member of the CIA, and coincidentally, I've filed a number of Freedom of Information requests with the CIA, and one of them that came back, well, several of them came back, have Alan Dulles, the former director of the CIA, and Gordon Wasson talking about having lunch together and approving different members for this Century Club that they were all members of. It was a CIA front, and essentially Wasson and Dulles were the head guys of that.
Well, wasn't Dulles the head of the Warrant Commission investigating the JFK assassination?
Oh, I don't know if he was. That's a good question. I would have to, let me pull that up, and I have a database here I can look up real quick. So we've got the Warren Commission, and yep, he was in charge of that, as was Earl Warren, obviously the Warren Commission. Then we have Gerald Ford, Hale Boggs, and John J. McCloy. And so you are correct. And interestingly, excuse me, you know, and I should mention that I've been sick with a fever for the last couple of days and just getting over it. So if I'm a little incoherent in spots, I apologize for that.
Look at it this way, Jan. With the information that you're exposed to, even if you're running at 10% of your normal capacity, you're still 1,000% better than most people.
Well, thanks. I'm not sure if that's a very good statement for the state of affairs, though. So, well, you know, the idea is to raise everybody's level up.
It's difficult to find positive statements of the current state of affairs, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, you know, and that's why we put so much focus on teaching everyone the ancient classical 7 liberating arts of the Trivium and Quadrivium, because that is actually the entire control mechanism of how this New World Order thing works and how they manipulate the media and use logical fallacies and things to manipulate people. And when people study the Trivium especially, they pretty much become immune to those types of intellectual attacks and attempts at you know, mind control, etc. And for those of your audience who don't believe they have predators, I suggest studying for 45 minutes the logical fallacies and then go turn on the mainstream media and just watch the corporate news for 10 minutes and tell me that in every segment they aren't using the entire barrage of fallacies against you. And so once you have that recognition, then you can actually begin to filter that stuff out to find the truth. And this is why they've removed the real classical 7 liberating arts from the education system. This, you know, this liberal arts crap that they sell in the universities today is nothing like the ancient Trivium and Quadrivium, and it's a very watered down system. And the liberating arts are, as I said, the Trivium and Quadrivium. The Trivium is grammar, logic, and rhetoric, always in that order. Grammar answers who, what, where, and when, and it's the foundation of knowledge. And logic is why, and it is essentially the process of non-contradictory identification. And it gives us, well, it tells us why. It's our understanding of the pieces that we've gathered through knowledge. And then rhetoric, the final stage, is how. And that's basically what we express to others after we've collected the knowledge in the first stage, filtered the contradictions and the fallacies out in the logic or understanding in the second stage, and then express that to others like we're doing right now in the third stage. And so that is the ancient Trivium. It's essentially who, what, where, when, why, and how. It's stuff that we've all been taught since, you know, first grade. And the irony is they try and make the 7 liberal arts part of the universities. Well, guess what, folks? This is stuff that you were supposed to be taught in elementary school from 1st through 8th grade. And then by the time you were done with 8th grade, then you were considered an autodidact or a self-learner. And then you could go on and study the higher arts of the Quadrivium, or you would go into the universities from there. But Before the mid-1800s, they didn't even allow people into universities if you didn't first have a foundation in the classical trivium.
Is it a vetting process for having a mind that is actually worth its salt?
Sure. Yeah, it's just a systematic way to always know where and how you gathered your information and the direction you came from. And then when any new information comes in, it's a systematic way to go back and compare it to the old information, check it with the old information, see if the old information is valid or the new information is valid, and then be able to update yourself. And because it centers on logic in the second aspect, or the why aspect, we filter out logical fallacies. And so that way we can filter out, any of the fallacies that we find in there, including the fallacious fallacy. Well, I see a fallacy, therefore it's wrong. Just spotting a fallacy doesn't make it automatically wrong. It means that you still have to go out and fact check it, even if you do spot that fallacy, but it just brings your attention to it.
Okay, well, I think presidents are very good at that, because whenever I see a president or a prime minister speak, all I see is a phallus. We'll be right back after the break at thevinnieeastwoodshow.com.
If you take an active interest in maintaining the optimum health and well-being of yourself and your family, the New Zealand Journal of Natural Medicine is the magazine you've been waiting for. Having taken Australia and New Zealand by storm, the New Zealand Journal of Natural Medicine is now available in the UK and Europe. Visit www.nznaturalmed.co.uk or call 01626 337 531 to order your copy now.
Do you realise every day we are being put under constant stress from wireless radiation? What's worse is that you don't even know that it's happening. It puts as much stress on our body as if we had a constant viral infection, draining our energy and sapping our strength, or just making us irritable and fatigued. These wireless fields are being emitted from computers, microwaves, mobile phones, power lines, and any electrical appliance. Now there is a solution. A group of research engineers in New Zealand have come up with an active shielding device that shields you from wireless radiation at a cellular level. Blue Shield comes in 3 models: a household, portable, and USB that plugs into any computer. The great thing about Blue Shield is it is very affordable and guaranteed to last. A one-off purchase will see you being protected for years to come. Visit AmericanFreedomRadio.com and click on the Blue Shield banner. Blue Shield, brought to you by thevinnieeastwoodshow.com.
No matter where you live, globalism affects you. Did you know that the Vinnie Eastwood Show has more subscribers than New Zealand Herald TV and is New Zealand's most popular YouTube news channel, where warm-hearted humour and a list of awesome guests talk about crucial issues which the mainstream media ignore? A show where you, the listener, can phone up with questions, comments and suggestions of guests. Vinnie is building a hub to connect truthers with raw information they need to become active. He can help you gain further skills such as website building, producing audio and video, and creating revenue streams in your own multimedia environment. Because Vinnie supports such a wide range of people in the truth movement, he is not government or corporate backed and relies entirely on your donations. Give now, give generously, or subscribe for $10 a month for access to ad-free video archives. Just visit thevinnieeastwoodshow.com and click donate.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Vinnie Eastwood Show. My very special guest, Jan Irvin, and he's coming off quite well considering his physical constraints. And we were discussing over the break the implication of the man cold, where a large man will be struck with a cold or a flu of some righteous affliction and will be laid up in bed and be basically absolutely desperately in need of a missus to cook him tea and bring him hot drinks and things like that. It's happened to me. It happens to all us men, but unfortunately Jan's missus is out of state. The poor dear. Jan, welcome back.
Thank you, sir.
Now, you've written how many books exactly?
Well, 2 that are published. I've got a very large 2-volume interview set that I've also done called The Secret History of... Oh, what the heck is it called? Hold on a second. Grab a copy of it here. Entheogens in Consciousness, a comprehensive overview of psychedelic studies. And then I'm working on another one, The Secret History of Magic Mushrooms, that's more in the writing stage right now. This large 2-volume interview set is actually mostly finished. I've just haven't found a publisher willing to take on such a large task, and that's a set of about 50 interviews that I did on my podcast with many of the leading entheogen scholars throughout the world, going into just about all of the various aspects of psychedelic or entheogenic studies. And it sort of creates a fishbowl effect over the entire field. And Inner Traditions had shown some interest in it, but they didn't think at such a large 2 volumes that they would sell anything. Even though I've got my own show and audience that I think would pick it up and sell it anyway. But so there's 2 published, 3 written, and another one in the works. There's probably a couple others that I've started and never finished as well.
Okay. Well, I have this memory a number of years back, Jan, when myself, my friend Will Ryan, and another friend of mine, who was also named Jan, actually, we went to a award-giving ceremony at the Auckland University, where Helen Clark, who's now number 3 at the UN with a $9 billion budget for vaccines for Africa, is getting 2 honorary doctorates in law for her great achievements. And a conversation.
Okay, you cut out. You cut out for a second. So.
Sorry. We were at the Auckland University of.
Okay.
And Helen Clark, the number 3 at the UN, was getting 2 honorary doctorates in law from the university, and we had this conversation about this mushroom cult, and it would appear as though many of the higher scholars that were wearing these very mushroom-shaped hats, and it further went on to elaborate that during some of the colonialization of different cultures, those people who were practicing what they would call, I think the word is pharmacratic aspects, like using substances to do all that, right, was sort of
pharmacratic. Pharma being drug and cratic is ruling, so it would be drug ruling. But to put it in perspective for you, let me read this quote from Dr. Jolyon West, and he says, quote, "The role of drugs in the exercise of political control is also coming under increased discussion. Control can be through prohibition or supply. The total or even partial prohibition of drugs gives the government considerable leverage for other types of control. An example would be the selective application of drug laws against select components of the population, such members of certain minority groups or political organizations." And this is from his book published in 1975, Hallucinations, Behavior, Experience, and Theory. And, so these are, these guys are intentionally using and manipulating the drugs and the drug laws and the information about psychedelics and the shamanic experience, and they've sort of repackaged the whole thing into neo-shamanism stuff that they've sold all the Westerners, and taken out all of the dark shamanism aspects that exist in South America, etc. And so, all of these things sort of play into how they manipulate the drug laws and access to the drugs to sort of control certain political groups. Now, how they would do that with, say, middle and middle upper class, mostly white people, would be to have them, go down to South America, take an ayahuasca session, then they feel all spiritual, and then basically what happens then is without the Trivium, people start becoming pillow sitters and positive thinkers, and it's all from there. It all becomes, everything is just fuzzy and positive, and they're not being balanced. They're not. They stop fact checking information. They stop believing in this world, even though we have to believe in it. And they, there's if you study the Kabbalah, there's both large face and small face, as Daniel Feldman points out in his book. And so what they've done is they've essentially gotten everyone to focus on one and not the other. They completely omit the other. Either side you look at it. If you're focused on complete reality, I forget which one is which, large face or small face, but then you're missing small face. For instance, if you're completely focused on the other side, you're missing large face. Both exist simultaneously, and you have to have balance. And this is why, when you get into the Kabbalah, the top 3 positions before you get to the crown, and I have it written down somewhere, I don't have it in front of me, but the top 3 positions coincide with the Trivium: knowledge, understanding, and wisdom, and then you reach the crown. And so, and then the triangles within the Kabbalah tree itself actually are composed of the quadrivium. That's the 5-3-4 triangle. And so we have all of these direct tie-ins right there that make it very clear that, you need balance and critical thinking and fact-checking before you can reach the crown. You don't negate one for the other. You don't say, well, grammar and logic, that's for people who only care about, the world, and they don't have any concept of what's spiritual, or, they've never had a psychedelic experience or any of this kind of nonsense. It's all about balance and checking your beliefs and making sure they're valid before you pass a mental virus downstream to other people.
What kind of responsibility does that bear? Because I've always thought of teachers as being the ones who are responsible for how their students turn out. If you teach the student to not need the teacher, then the teacher is the best one of all.
Well, then the student becomes the teacher. And obviously that's the whole game plan of the entire compulsory education system, is to get people to appeal constantly to false authority, to teachers, to judges, to politicians, mommy and daddy government, every time they need something accomplished. Essentially these politicians are a bunch of clowns in Halloween costumes. They you have a judge or you have a police officer, they put on a badge and a funny hat and a uniform, and then all of a sudden they go around and they do things that they would normally never ever do under any other circumstance in life. It's like and I recommend people getting into Larkin Rose's work, but essentially the government is the world's largest religion, and the way that the government and the elites maintain control is just simply by our belief in government in itself. And government is a non-tangible belief. It doesn't exist. If you were to go out and find it, you could find a building or maybe a representative or something that you supposedly elected, but there is, the idea of government is a phantom. It's just a god. It's a religion. And so what happens is these politicians get you to vote for them, and then this is what gives them their power in the first place. And supposedly, we're able to give them power that we don't have. Like, you don't have the power to go rob and steal from your next door neighbor, right? But if you put on a badge and do it in the name of government, you can show up and you can demand tax money from your neighbor. And if he doesn't pay up, you beat him with a billy club and you steal his house. This is the definition of the mob, and it's all based on trickery. So, the only way that the elites can even keep this whole game going is by tricking the police officers and the people, that are actually part of our group, our caste, to go around and beat us up for the elites to keep us in line. So essentially, it's the Stockholm syndrome. It's our own group that, goes out. I forget the technical name for it, but, that goes out and beats everybody up to get them back into line when they stand out. And, and Larkin Rose covers extensively how in a voluntary society, protection from home robbery and things like that exist. And, in Australia, for instance, they banned everybody's guns, and then you have to appeal to mommy and daddy government to come and protect you from anything. And then you have an increase of murders and home invasion robberies and things like this. And of course, the criminals don't ever turn over their weapons. But what happens is that you give up your autonomy, your personal right and liberty to defend yourself, and you give that over to this organization that is actually there to rob you. So, okay, so wait. I'm going to give up my ability to protect myself from one group of thugs to another group of thugs. Does that make any sense? They're both thugs. They both steal. Only one of them puts on a complete puppet show every few years and gets you to vote for them, and then and then puts on all of these religious rituals to get you to believe that they're official, and then they can go around and steal from you, and then you allow it. But as soon as people wake up that government is just a religious dogma, and the second that you wake up to it and see through it, it completely vanishes. Their power over you completely disappears. This is why in countries like Australia and other places, they'll actually fine people that don't vote, because this is to force the people to participate in that system, because if nobody voted, they would have zero power to do any of this stuff. And then of course the question comes up, well, how would anything get done without government, without this religious illusion? Well, just ask yourself, how does anything get done anyway? By we the people. And then you wouldn't have the government stealing a third of your money, and then you would be able to donate some of your money to your local health fund or your local road fund, or these things, and it's all voluntary, instead of the ad baculum fallacy. If you don't pay up, I'm going to come and kick your ass and steal your stuff.
Well, I have this feeling that we're going to shift from a Cold War to a hot war, where it will no longer be simply threats of violence that we give into. There won't even be a threat anymore. They'll just go straight into violence. That's what I...
Oh, sure. Well, and that's what they're trying to get at. But, it's the Trivium is key to prevent this from happening. And that's why it's so essential that people get out and learn and study the Trivium. And it takes about 2 years for it to become fully integrated and automatic in your mind. But, essentially what the Trivium is it's a mental antivirus system against them, because it's their system of control. And when you learn it, you see how they manipulate and control everything, and you can protect yourself from it. And, it's just the constant process of waking more and more people up so that they can see through it and not participate. And it is, we are in a race, and more and more people are waking up very quickly to this stuff, to, the history of the Trivium, to the logical fallacies, to the, we haven't even gotten into yet how the psychedelic movement was usurped, essentially, to put it very simply, and used for mind control as well. And they use this whole positive thinking aspect surrounding around the psychedelics. I guess I did talk about that, to control and herd the people in the direction they want without critical or balanced thinking. And so this is entirely done through fallacious logic and a misuse of the Trivium. And essentially the only way you can protect yourself from this stuff is to study it, to go out and study grammar, logic, and rhetoric, as you should have learned in grammar school, right?
I don't know why people send their children to school. I mean, did they ever go to school themselves? Do they know what it's like there? And it's even worse now than it was back in the day.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. Yeah, and people that really want to get into how the compulsory education system is completely corrupt, they should study John Taylor Gatto. He's written a number of books, and some partners at Tragedy and Hope and I did last year. We put out a 5-part. Well, they put out a 5-part interview series, and then we all put out on top of the 5-hour interview with Gatto. We did 15-minute commentary dispersed throughout the entire talk so that people can follow along with the research and understand the depth and scope of it all.
And also, I'd like to advise people, repetition is absolutely crucial for this type of very highbrow information. It is impossible to absorb it all in one show. So if you're listening to this show and you don't understand it, you're going to have to listen to it a few times again. We'll be right back after the break.
Was pretty much destroyed overnight. But in the last 40 years, 42 years, a number of professors and scholars from all over the world have picked up what Allegro was researching. And in my book, The Holy Mush-room that you mentioned, what I did was I went through all of the attacks against Allegro's psychedelic and mushroom research in the Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, all of his specific ties to entheogens. And I went through line by line, and I showed that all of the attacks against his work were in fact false. And then I followed up with 40 or 42 Christian icons that explicitly show the mushroom. And then I concluded the book with an ancient primary Christian Orthodox text, the Epistle to the Renegade Bishops, that specifically discusses the quote-unquote holy mushroom. And this was the first ancient primary text that had ever been published of the quote-unquote holy mushroom, and thereby completely vindicating Allegro's work. And, you know, today we've got a number of scholars all over the place. There's Professor John Rush and Alan Piper, and there's Professor Earl Lee and Professor Carl Ruck, and a number of others, even some Italian and German scholars that have come out fully publicly endorsing Allegro's work, and furthermore showing that the conclusions by Wasson and other scholars in previous decades were completely wrong. And in fact, the attacks against Allegro's work were based entirely on fallacies. And this guy Wasson, who headed all of the attacks, in fact admitted, and he was the pioneer of the field of ethnomycology, which is the study of mushrooms in religion and culture. And this guy, he is the one who launched all of the attacks.
It truly is. His name is Jan Irvin. His website is gnosticmedia.com. That's Gnostic with a G. And also, you can purchase up to, I think he's written a number of books there. One that I was particularly interested in is The Holy Mushroom, Evidence of Mushrooms in Judeo-Christianity. And he's a very well endowed in the media sense of the word man, so I'd like to welcome him now. Jan, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me on.
Now, for those who are unfamiliar, would you please give us a brief background on this this book you've written, The Holy Mushroom?
Sure. Okay. Well, that's actually my second book. My first book was Astrotheology and Shamanism. That in that book, we went in and looked at the as above, so below themes between.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Vinny Eastwood Show. It's the lighter side of genocide, because in a world so full of chaos and madness, if you lose your sense of humour, you'll go friggin' nuts. Broadcasting live from the fabulously fluoridated capital of Auckland, New Zealand, the island-chained nation in the sunny slave South Pacific. It's both fluoridated and Fukushima irradiated, and everybody has a part-time job as an incandescent light bulb on behalf of the Prime Minister John Key, former Federal Reserve banker, to help the economy. Today we have one of the big and illustrious, fabulous people that walk around the planet, who actually have done an awful lot of work and research of a primary nature, which can give us some insight onto how the world
in sun worship and solar worship, etc., star worship with entheogen use or psychedelic use in the ancient religions. And this was published in 2005, and then I put it out in a second edition. And then the follow-up research to that, I had been working with John Allegro's daughter, Judith Ann Brown, And we were investigating at the time what happened to John Allegro's career and his background. And I guess I should tell people who John Allegro is. He was this famous Dead Sea Scrolls scholar that in 1970 came out and published a book called The Sacred Mushroom and the Cross, declaring that Judeo-Christianity was based on a fertility drug cult. And then he went from being one of the most respected scholars in the academic field to one of the most mocked and ridiculed. And his career